Hey everyone, welcome to another fabulous episode of The Thoughtful Bro. I'm so excited to be cutting it up with Bruce Holsinger today. He is the author of Culpability, the summer Oprah book club pick. This is a great, gripping, deceptively tricky procedural with lots of twists and turns. I found it very satisfying. It was like a 5-course meal that ended up being 7 courses because I was satisfied after 5 and then the hits just kept coming. It was just, this is an ingeniously constructed book, but I am getting ahead of myself. A few words before we start talking to Bruce. We're here on A Thoughtful Bro live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube via a Mighty Blaze, the great Mighty Blaze. We're here as always on Tuesdays at 2 to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. We at a Mighty Blaze are an all-volunteer initiative connecting writers and readers virtually. We are never asking for money at a Mighty Blaze. If you want to show the love, just follow us on social media, repost us, tell your friends about us. Or if you do want to spend money, boy, do I have an idea for you. Spend your hard-earned dollars and cents on suspenseful family dramas about moral responsibility in the age of artificial intelligence. Spend your money on Culpability by Bruce Holsinger. We are going to put a link to buy that, as always, through bookshop.org in the chat, but I think we're also going to link to Bruce's favorite bookstore, Commerce Street Books. He can talk about that in a moment. But please go ahead, buy a book for your friend. Summer is not over. There's still a few weeks left, or read it in the fall. It's a wonderful read. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. A little bit more about Bruce. He is the author of 5 novels, including The Displacements and The Gifted School. He's written for the New York Times and Vanity Fair. He's a Guggenheim Fellow and a Fellow of the Medieval Academy of America. He teaches in the Department of English at the University of Virginia, and his latest book, Culpability, as I said, is the Oprah's Book Club summer read. It's a gripping story about a family torn apart by the deadly crash of a self-driving car. The venerable Ron Charles wrote in the Washington Post, "If you want an engaging novel sure to spark great discussion about our thorny AI future, this is it." Bruce Holsinger, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Oh my God, I'm psyched. And before we get going, Commerce Street Books, let's just knock that out right away. That's a new favorite bookstore of yours?
Yeah, it's a new favorite bookstore. I have a lot of favorite bookstores, but it's a great new bookstore in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia. I think that the owner, this guy Philip, has a great vision for it. Just another great independent.
Awesome. So as I said, I thought Culpability was great. It was a great slow build. It was very satisfying, as I said, with lots of great cards dealt out unexpectedly. I'm like the perfect audience for one of these, because I never see it coming. I'm totally the dope in the audience who's just oh my God, I never would have thought. So I really enjoyed it. I'm also obsessed with AI issues and kind of our own cultural reckoning right now with AI. And so we're going to spend a good portion of the interview today just talking about kind of the current mood around AI and sort of what are we doing right now. But before we get into any of that, why don't you, just for the sake of those who haven't read Culpability yet, just give us a thumbnail sketch of the book.
Yeah, so the book starts with a family of 5 in a minivan. They're on their way to a lacrosse tournament in Delaware for the oldest son. His name is Charlie. He's driving. He's at the wheel. He's about to go to UNC on a big lacrosse scholarship. He's at the wheel, but he's not driving because the car is in self-driving mode, in autonomous mode. Next to him is his dad, Noah. Noah's a corporate lawyer. He's on his laptop banging out a client memo while the car is driving along. In the back, Charlie's 2 sisters, Izzy and Alice, are noodling away on their phones. And their mom and Noah's wife, Lorelei Shaw, is sitting behind Charlie, and she's writing in her notebook, working on a conference paper. And that the family has this really awful accident that kills people in the other car. And a big part of the rest of the novel is thinking about who or what is responsible for the accident and why. There's a few opening twists that you learn. One is that Lorelei Shaw, the wife of Noah, the mother of Charlie, is a world leader in the field of ethical artificial intelligence. The epigraph from the book, in fact, is her words coming from a piece of writing that she does on the ethics of artificial intelligence called Silicon Souls. And then the epigraph goes right into the story that Noah tells us in the first person. So as you say, it's a suspenseful family drama about the creep of AI into so many aspects of our lives. But more than AI, it's about how a family gets through a crisis and how they, how their relationships sustain themselves and are threatened, how the outside world is coming in, even as Noah's trying to hold it back so they can recover. It's about all those things, even as it's taking place in this new world defined by chatbots, by self-driving cars, by large language models, all of that.
So much to get into, but before we even go any further, my understanding is that you yourself were once in a car accident. Was this sort of like based on reflecting on that incident in any way?
Yeah, I was in a couple of car accidents, and neither of them involved a car in autonomous mode. The one, there was a plane accident that I was in also
Oh my
many
gosh.
years ago. I know, and that, I hadn't thought about that in a while, but everybody was okay. But my brother-in-law was flying the plane. It was a small plane. There were 5 of us in there, and there was a headline like a week after the accident. And the headline in this little North Carolina town's newspaper said, "Lucky 5 escaped crash." And
Hmm.
that kind of stayed in my mind as I was writing this. Just think what it feels like to have this lucky survival,
Hmm.
when you're worried about, so much else.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing I was thinking about with AI driving and self-driving cars, I was just there's a question in the audience about would you go in an Uber that AI self-drives? And like I haven't been in one alone where there's nobody else in there, but my driver drove part of the way to the airport by himself, but also like turned it over to the Tesla
Yeah, yeah.
system for part of it. But it got me thinking, like, I mean, my kids are just at the age now where my oldest just got his driver's license. And I just thought to myself, like, is this just going to be a thing of the past? Like sort of like riding a horse? Like, will my grandchildren be like, oh my God, grandpa, you drove a car? Like
Yeah.
that's so dangerous and how unsafe, you know?
Yeah. Well, that is such a great kind of semi-futuristic question. Have you ever been in a Waymo, like in LA or
Mm-mm, mm-mm,
San Francisco? So there are now fully autonomous
mm-mm,
taxis, right? There's no human driver, and you just summon them with an app. So I did that while I was doing research for the novel.
mm.
I did it more recently. They've gotten a lot better in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
That is one of the most uncanny experiences.
I bet.
And there are tourists around who will take a picture of somebody driving in a Waymo, but it's just become part of the street culture of those cities. And honestly, I feel much safer in a Waymo than I do in an Uber. Where have you ever been in an Uber where the driver did not check their phone? Uh,
Mm,
you know, Probably
mhm,
not. And
mhm.
so it's those are gig workers. They have a lot of, it's low pay. Of
Yeah,
course, they're trying to get their next gig.
yeah, yeah.
But Waymo, its primary job is to keep you safe. So I don't know. I'm less skeptical about that particular aspect of things.
And we are going to get into that in a moment, just kind of about the um, is the future with our AI overlords actually a really sunny one? And I think this book makes some interesting points about whether it's good or bad. But I just want to talk for a moment about like your career, and this is like the third kind of zeitgeisty novel that you've written. That you wrote The Gifted School, which is about competitive school admissions. You wrote about disaster relief and the displacements, and now here you are talking about AI. And it's an interesting recipe. I mean, you take like a kind of like hot button issue, you whip up a novel around it. I don't mean to sound like dismissive when I say
Yeah,
whip
yeah.
up, but I'm like, geez, this is sort of a great thing you got going here.
Well, that's nice of you to say. They've been called, these last 3 novels have been called moral thrillers.
Mm,
And I like that phrase. It's not like I think, what's a zeitgeisty topic
yeah.
and write a novel around it. It's much more that I write about what obsesses me.
Mm,
So when I wrote The Gifted School, I was really obsessed with uber competitive parenting culture, right?
mhm,
Coming from Boulder, Colorado, where parents are just huge about like where are you sending him to preschool?
Mm.
What was his APGAR score? I'm not kidding, like crazy stuff like that. And
I
just,
don't even know what that is, but
it's just a whole other thing. It's like, it's a score that infants get when they're first born
oh my
about
God.
how well they're breathing, all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
So I was, just thinking about it from the moment of my kid's birth.
Mm.
And then I ended up writing that novel years later, but it happened to come out right when the college admission scandal was happening. So that was where the zeitgeisty stuff began. And then The Displacements, my last novel, which was about climate displacement, came out right at a moment when some big hurricanes were hitting. So, and this one is coming out in the age of AI, even though when I started writing it, I wasn't thinking about AI at all. I was thinking about autonomous driving, but I wasn't thinking about that as artificial intelligence. That wasn't a category that I was interested in. And then I was finishing a second draft right when the big ChatGPT craze hit in late 2022. And that's just, then I realized, I think I'm writing a novel about artificial intelligence. That's partly what I'm doing.
So you just have an uncanny sense of timing, is what it's.
I guess so. It's been very lucky, I suppose. The screen, yeah.
All right. So this book is, in many ways, it's sort of a classic kind of exploration of some scary new technology, or scary to some, and the kind of unintended consequences of technology. But I think that one thing that's remarkable about this book is that it's very even-handed. This is not a Black Mirror episode.
Yes.
There's not finger pointing. And in fact, I might even say that if there's any finger pointing, it's about the humans. And I was thinking to myself at one point, I was like, this novel also could have been called Complicity. It's just it's about how we are just kind of sort of like every problem in the novel, like every event, every kind of turn of the story hinges on some kind of complicated interface between humans and some kind of technology, not always AI per se, but just, part of our technological world. And then there sets off a new round of kind of like, are we better off or not? Or do we have the right and best kind of relationship with our technological world that we've built? But I guess my question there is just kind of to begin, was that an intention of yours? Like, for example, did you say you know what, I want to write something that's more kind of fair, or kind of presents both sides? Or did you kind of start out on one side of the spectrum and you kind of, through your research, came out somewhere else?
Yeah, I would say it's much more the latter, I suppose. But I would also put this novel in the company of some others that have come out in the last 6 months or a year that where there's not this kind of simplistic condemnation of technology, of where everybody's just, we're in a kind of apocalyptic or dystopian sort of future where robots are running us, right? I think it's much more, I like the way you put that this is just as much about our own responsibility as the machines. Because as Lorelei points out, we create the machines. So we are ultimately responsible for their ethics. And I would put it in the company of books like, Sarah Slygar's Vantage Point, which has to do with deep fakes, also a very kind of morally interested novel. Sierra Greer, which is called Antibot.
Oh, I read Antibot.
It's a brilliant novel.
Yeah.
Both of these are brilliant novels. And then Janelle Brown, her novel about kind of a reimagining of Ted Kaczynski through the lens of his daughter, his fictional daughter, of course. So, I see I see technology not as a bad or a good, but as an inevitability that has very kind of complicated moral complications to it, that are woven through our lives in all these different ways.
Would you say, though, that, you said a moment ago that it wasn't really an AI book per se when you started out, but regardless, just when you started out on this topic, on this book, did you feel that you were more positive or more negative about the technology you were writing about than you are now?
I was probably about the same, weirdly, even though I've learned a lot more about it. Things have surprised me, but I would say, honestly, what got me interested in self-driving cars was not being in a autonomous or a car in autonomous mode. It was simply the cruise control on this Toyota we bought 6 or 7 years ago. I was like, this is really cool. It will keep you this a certain distance back from the other car. That's amazing. Because the worst accident I ever had in a car was rear-ending someone else. And I thought, well, this is not going to happen. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And just in this dumb, naive way. And that just started me thinking, okay, so there's also lane control. And then I was in this mode where I was thinking, okay, so this family gets in this accident, and who is responsible? But what might be just as interesting is what is responsible. And that's what got me. So the technology, I'm not a techno optimist at all, but I'm also not a kind of techno pessimist. I much more, I'm not in a squishy middle ground either. I think it really depends on what you're talking about. I think that autonomous driving is probably going to end up being much safer than human. We kill 40, 60,000 people on the highways every year in human driven cars. So, anything to make that safer. But then also large language models in the classroom, I have real issues with. And
I mean, this is one of the things about AI, right? Is that like it's so massive, and people are like, "Oh, here's my opinion about AI." I mean, that's sort of like saying, like, here's my opinion about computers, or here's my opinion about vehicles. I mean, it's just like it's so broad that it's just like it becomes meaningless, and it's like, and I also think that like the way there's often a thing, and I don't want to jump ahead of myself. We'll get into this more later in the conversation, but it's like, there's this thing about AI, which is like, people are like, oh, who asked for this? Or like, who wanted the world this way? But really, the way the world becomes this way is not like because of some master plan. It's just like, there's like a discrete little advance over here, then another little advance over here. And then like, all these little things like, oh, we got to solve this problem with, medicine, and this problem with telecommunications. And then all of a sudden you get a large language model, and it seems like it's taken over, but really it's just like this slow, like 1,000 things moving incrementally all together. Then all at once you look around and you're like, it's the age of AI, but it's,
Yeah, exactly. And, in culpability, I was really trying to, once I sort of realized, okay, this is about moral responsibility in the age of AI. And so it's not about it, and so then I just thought, okay, what are some ways I can thicken this? And I thought about, Lorelei, and we read excerpts of her book. And then there's a whole strand about a chatbot interacting with one of the daughters, which I'm sure you'll want to talk about. It's kind of a tech billionaire. There's all these different layers of this kind of technology coming into their lives and affecting their relationships in various ways.
Well, just on the thickening aspect of it, just one thing from a craft perspective that I thought was great, and which like I don't have this particular skill in my writing, which is like the kind of like the deft dealing of the cards. I mean, there was like, I had kind of heard through the grapevine that there was a great reveal at the end of this book, and it's funny because like I actually thought like the reveal before the big reveal was the big reveal. And then when the actual big reveal came, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, there were just so many great cards that you dealt. And I just wanted to ask you from a craft perspective, like how did you do that? Did you know all along that you like had about, say like 6 big twists in the book and they were going to come here, here, and here? Or was it just kind of more organic?
No, it really was more organic. I'm a terrible plotter.
Yeah.
So I never write a big outline. I never, I generally know where I'm kind of, the main thing I know is how I want my reader to feel at the end of the novel.
Ooh.
Right. I want you to feel a little bit of shock or a little bit of sadness, some melancholy, some, I want you to leave remembering and knowing these characters, but wishing for more. Right. And so I think all my novels are so different. Like there's only 1 or 2 of them I would really call thrillers. Like I wasn't thinking of Culpability as a thriller. It was much more a family drama, but I ended up writing it in shorter chapters because I wanted people to be turning pages quickly.
Yeah.
I ended up putting things in between chapters because I wanted little spritzes of other perspectives coming in.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it happens accidentally because I'm very deliberate about building suspense, about structure, about how a chapter should feel, how a sequence of chapters should look. But I don't know, it's hard to know without unpacking it.
Right. Well, it really worked for me. Back to AI and self-driving cars for a moment. A lot of the book is about ethics, as we've talked about. And I think this is like something that I hadn't really thought about was that there might be kind of like unsolvable ethical problems that face an autonomous AI-driven machine. Like, say, like for example, a self-driving car is going down a highway, and then in front of it, like an old woman and a young boy, like fall off a pickup truck, and and the self-driving car like has to hit one of them. This is
Yeah.
something that you explore sort of in the book, and the idea that like there would actually be programming that would like somehow like instantaneously at the speed of light, the car and the cameras of the car would size up like, okay, well, I've got to choose between hitting an old woman and a little boy, and how does it choose where to swerve? I mean, a human probably wouldn't make such a calculation, but maybe the AI would have time to make such a decision. And I just think like, that's just really interesting and sort of weird that such a thing would exist. But B, the idea that like there's actually a human being sort of somewhere down the line, sort of teaching, if you will, the AI, like what is a moral choice in these kinds of decision-making situations.
Yeah, no, those are very, those kinds of granular decisions are, between old woman and boy, are not the kind of decisions that a machine, like at the moment anyway,
right,
will make. But it will make a choice about, okay, this body is bigger than that body,
right.
so I should hit the smaller body because it will do less harm to the people in the car. That
There you go.
maybe that kind of dilemma, where it recognizes both as humans, maybe not age, but there's all kinds of issues of algorithmic injustice and algorithmic inequality in terms of race and so on, and visual recognition. So I think the ethical issues around this are so complicated. So, there's a lot of people working on them, but it's still so primitive in many ways. And so who knows what it'll look like in 10 years. And I'm no expert on this. You're a novelist, how it is. Like the research that you do is very, very wide, but can often be pretty shallow at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And one other aspect of the story that I found really interesting was, this relationship between one of the daughters in the family, and she has like an AI companion that she talks to, and sort of chats with, and does a little bit of therapy with as a friend. And we see those conversations in the book. This is another area that it's just filled with like ethical landmines, it seems. There was this crazy story from years ago with this company called Replica, where there was a disturbed young man who chatted with his chatbot about killing the Queen of England, and then I think like actually broke into the grounds of Buckingham Palace with like a crossbow or something, and like was almost at the Queen. But there's been studies that chatting with AI bots like actually worsens mental health in some ways. Again, I am not an expert, and certainly there's a lot of people out there that who can't find a therapist, or who are very lonely, who really love this kind of technology. But the thing to say about it, I think, is it's just completely unregulated.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Not only that, but it's also the kinds of harm that it's potentially doing, that it's actually doing.
Yeah.
There was this very moving, disturbing piece in the New York Times just the other day. It was by a mother, a writer, saying, and the op-ed was the last conversation my daughter had with a chatbot before she took her own life.
Oh my God.
And it was, there are all kinds of lawsuits now about chatbots kind of substituting for therapists. And in the novel, Alice, the middle daughter, the middle child, she struggles. Izzy and Charlie, her siblings on either side, are super charismatic. They have friends to burn. They're athletic. And Alice is really struggling. And she, after they go to the hospital, the family goes to the hospital when they're back home convalescing. Noah finds her texting, and he says, who are you texting? Because as far as he knows, she doesn't have any people to text with. And she says, my friend Blair. And Noah says, oh, I didn't know you had a friend. And Alice says, I met her in the hospital. Which is true in the sense that Alice created her out of this, created her avatar out of an app on her phone while she was in the hospital. But now this chatbot Blair is her only friend. And so that is that. I think we get 8 or 9 snippets of their conversation throughout Culpability, but it's definitely a thread of suspense that winds through the novel.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk for a moment about the AI age that we're living in, just kind of more broadly. And I just think like there's a lot of hand wringing about it. And what's interesting is that, again, your book is even handed, but there's people on both sides of this that feel passionately. And there was a very interesting review by a Goodreads reader of this book. And he was basically like, I won't ever stand to hear anything negative about AI because I am blind. And AI has been like a miracle in my life and has kind of revolutionized the way I've been able to live my own life as a blind person. So I would just say that like that's just like an example of somebody who is like has a certain very specific point of view on AI for personal reasons. But anyway, suffice it to say, there's people on both sides of it. But I would say, as a writer who is mostly friends with writers, there is like a lot of malaise. And I was like trying to think of like a clever word for this mood that we feel. And I was like thinking like malaise, like with AI, like alienation, AI, anxiety with AI, angst. I was like, I don't know. I was trying to think of like something clever to say, but I feel like there should be a word for this thing that people feel.
One of those long German words, right?
Exactly.
Alienation, uncanniness, I think is one, the uncanny valley, that concept, we're all walking through it now. And that, the example that you brought up of the Goodreads reviewer who said, I won't hear anything about, bad about displacement Weltanschauung. That is a, that is true of a lot of technology. There's a big effort among a lot of people to just get laptops out of classrooms, right? But for the disability community, and for disability advocates, it's very that's a rocky road, or it's a what's the word? It's a twisted path. It's there's really two sides to it. So I agree with that, and I think that we're we don't want to make this into a black-white issue, I think.
Yeah. But I do think like, I was trying to think of like, why do people feel so anxious about it? There was a recent Quinnipiac poll that said 44% of Americans feel that AI will have a negative impact on their day-to-day lives. I mean, who knows how that question was exactly phrased or who the people were, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of this kind of malaise about it. I think it has to do with like a kind of loss of control, a feeling like no one really understands what it is. Obviously, it's like coming. I mean, there's an estimate by Goldman Sachs that like AI in the next 10 years will take like 300 million jobs globally. It's a lot of uncertainty. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you think is the true kind of psychological source of all this kind of hand wringing?
Yeah. All right. I have a couple of theories.
Yeah.
One of them is I see the emergence of AI as a kind of new form of speciation. Do you know the work of Stephen Jay Gould, who was a biological anthropologist?
I mean, I've heard of Stephen Jay Gould. But
so he wrote a really wonderful book on what's called the Cambrian explosion.
Oh yeah,
where I can't remember what the Cambrian epoch, hundreds of millions of years ago, where all these gazillions of new species kind of evolved fairly quickly. And to my mind, like AI, there's a feeling like that where I know that aside from all the arguments about AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which those don't interest me so much, for me, it's more the perception and the feeling of what's accompanying us now.
Yes.
When I'm typing something in a ChatGPT or Claude, when I'm in a Waymo on the streets, taking me through the streets of San Francisco, I am in a different kind of world. I'm in a world that is inhabited by these new sorts of beings that are cohabiting the world with me and are collaborating with me on certain kinds of things that are displacing human agency, but also mirroring it, even though it's not perfect, and it probably never will be. Nor I don't know if we'd want it to be. So for me, that's that kind of uncanny. It's this, the unsettledness is not just, I mean, a big part of it is just corporate malfeasance, the degradation of the environment because of these data centers, the absolutely disgusting displays of wealth. All of that is part of what is riling us up about these things. But there's also that sense of kind of reluctant awe at what they can do, and how much they're taking from us and our autonomy, and how they are emerging as these new beings in our world. So that I've lately become obsessed with that.
Yeah. My father-in-law is a radiologist, and like that job is just not even going to exist anymore.
Oh yeah.
And you could, I mean, I was talking to him, I saw him on summer vacation recently, and I said, how do you feel about all this? And he's like, I just feel very lucky, just in terms of like that I timed my career in like,
Yes.
he like just retired.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he's like, well, that you couldn't have that career again.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like at the same time, so it's like, there's an example of somebody who's in that line of work, who's maybe like 35 and just starting out, like they've got to kind of figure out a different kind of future. So maybe they don't feel great about it. But if you're one of the people who, like, a radiologist was right 96% of the time, but the AI is right 100% of the time, and
Right.
you were one of the people, you'll never know, but imagine you were one of those people who was saved. Like, certainly your feeling about AI will be very positive. But I agree with you that there's just like this collective thing. I would just think, for me, there's three things that bother me, and I just kind of want to hear what you think about this. Number one, three things that kind of add to my malaise. One is that it feels like an arms race that's just being blindly chased. Like we have to get there first. And so there's just like, throw caution to the wind. There's the surveillance aspect of it, that
Yes.
it's like, I mean, everything that is like a smart something is also a spy something.
Yeah.
Like you talk in your book, or I heard you talk in another interview about like vehicular forensics. Like if you're in a smart car, well, there's a bunch of cameras that are a witness to exactly where you were and how fast you were driving. And like, you're not going to fool like the vehicle's record. And then the other thing that you brought up as well was this kind of economic dislocation and wealth concentration. Like the idea that like, hundreds of millions of jobs will go away and be replaced by like these bots that are created by maybe like a dozen companies. And it's like, it just seems like the wealth is all going in one direction. So anyway, I don't know if any of those strike you as...
All of them. Yeah. And, that idea about surveillance, about constant scrutiny from these machines, what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, right?
Yeah.
That is a really dark, I mean, it's not just AI, but it's so many different forms of surveillance. But AI kind of exacerbates it. It makes it scarier. And then, all those other forms of loss, right? And displacement. Both of my sons work in fields that are heavily dependent on things like spreadsheets and programming and algorithms and so on. And I worry greatly for their futures, for the futures of their jobs and their world. Yeah. All of these things contribute to that anxiety.
What about AI's impact on novelists? I mean, we're both writers. I mean, I'm kind of curious how there's a lot of consternation that like, well, now AI will just write all the novels, write all the screenplays, write all the TV shows. How do you see that playing out?
I'm less worried about that. I don't, first of all, because I don't believe it will happen. I don't see, there are some jobs that I worry about, like audiobook narrators, for example, cover designs. I mean, there's definitely fights going on and people are pushing back. Independently publishing authors, like self-published authors, I think there's a lot more concern right now about the generation of novels in that space.
Yeah.
But I also think there's some interesting experiments going on. I don't know if you know this wonderful story by Sheila Heti in the New Yorker from a couple years ago.
I have heard of this story.
Yeah, you got to read it. It's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And basically, the whole story consists of answers to her prompts from Claude, the way she prompted Claude. So she doesn't publish her prompts, just the answers, the responses, and it's really surreal. It's a wonderful piece, and so I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that artists find a way, art finds a way, and I don't particularly worry about that. I think AI, these large language models or visual tools, are just that. They are tools. They are not art in themselves. And so I'm more sanguine about the arts, actually.
Well, you are also a professor of literature.
Yes.
Are you as sanguine about students and learning? And
no, that I am not. So there, I'm very much worried. It's not just about students, it's also professors. Like I edit a journal
Mm.
and I've gotten a couple of reader reports, like supposed peer reviews of essays that I've sent out that I could swear are generated by LLMs.
Mm.
So that is, it's not just, I think we like to blame our students, but no, and then on the other hand, you have, people will say, well, look, we would never tell a calculus student you can't use a calculator. So
Fair.
why are we telling writing students you can't use a writing machine
Mm.
like ChatGPT? No one's really making that argument, but it is, but it's out there. And so we're all struggling with like how we deal with this in the classroom.
Well, so one of the things that people talk about a lot is like, okay, well, you could just have them come into the class and like write their essays, and they can't have their phone. So yeah, there's sort of ways around it, and there's ways that teachers are dealing with it. But the real argument, the sort of like bigger problem, is learning to think and learning to think critically.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just like explain that problem? Like, why does AI inhibit a young person from learning how to properly use their brain?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that there's two elements. There's one element that is common to reading and to writing, and it is process, right? There's a process when you're writing a paper, let's say, about a poem. Part of the writing process is the reading of the poem, breaking it down, thinking about how the way the individual lines work as you're writing the paper.
Yeah.
So that the cognitive process that goes into a good close reading is kind of imminent to the writing itself. AI disrupts that process. So students can like plug in a poem, plug in a few prompts, and a paper will spit out. But what they've lost is this particular cognitive encounter with this beautiful artifact, right? This poem or whatever it is, or a piece of art or what have you. And then when it comes to reading, AI is not just interfering with reading or writing. It's also interfering with reading, where more and more students will use ChatGPT as a kind of instant Cliff's Notes, right? And again, what it's disrupting is the process of reading, putting together the elements of a sentence unconsciously as we read, putting two sentences together, putting two paragraphs together, eventually a chapter, eventually a novel or a poem. And I think it's tragic the way that we are robbing a generation. These things are robbing a generation, two generations of folks of the beauty of the process of reading, of writing about art. So
Well, let me just push back. I mean, like, I am like, you're preaching to the choir, but I just want to push back here and just say, like, well, why doesn't that sound like somebody saying, well, I learned how to ride a horse when I was young, and riding a horse is a beautiful animal, and like the experience of riding a horse is a breathtaking experience. And now there's these cars, and my child will be robbed of the experience of riding a horse. How is that not this? Like, if the car will always be here, and they will never have to ride a horse to lead a fulfilling life, or they'll never have to do long division without a calculator. Like, why is missing this step like valuable in and of itself?
Well, I think we could use your analogy, and we could say that because people have always ridden, right? They rode horses, cars, planes, just as people have always written and read. So going all the way back to the beginning of human civilization, carving on clay tablets, and writing, if writing becomes something that we give over to machines completely, or if reading becomes something that is no longer a form of absorption as it's been for 3,000 years, then I think we're fundamentally, I think it's always important to be aware of the history of technology. I talk a lot about the relationship between the disruptions of AI and the disruptions of the printing press, right? That there's definitely a historical analogy to be drawn there. But I do think this is something different. This feels more complete, more ravaging in its effects than anything else I know of.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Wow. All right. Overall, with your book, would you say? So first, there's a question like, is your book primarily designed to be entertainment? Like, do you just want people to have just a great read? So that's one question. And then I'll follow up on that and say, like, if you want it to be on some level something more than just entertainment, what would you like? What impact would you wish it would have?
Yeah, so I never write purely to entertain, but I feel like my primary goal is just to tell a really good story.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's the same thing, but I'm very influenced, from my work as a medievalist and stories within stories, stories clashing with stories, as in things like the Canterbury Tales or the Decameron, Thousand and One Nights. But I also think, there's an art to telling a good story, and craft is an inherent part of that. And, novels are not op-eds. I don't think of my novel as a piece of an opinion piece.
Mm-hmm.
I like novels. I like thinking of a novel as a thought experiment. And in this case, the thought experiment ended up being about AI and its ethical implications. And I suppose a message to take away is, hoping that people will take a deep breath, slow down a bit in our encounter with these technologies, and think a little more carefully about what we're doing, what they're doing, what we're doing in relationship to them, how these systems are compromising our relationships with one another in terms of communication, morals, and so on.
And let's imagine that people did think that, and they had just the reflections that you're talking about. What could be done about it?
Who knows? I mean, there's so many things above our pay grades, right? Governments not passing laws to regulate these systems, hardly any laws at all. And not just in the Trump administration, but in Europe, the EU, where they have some guidelines, but they're very weak and milquetoast. And tech companies are just ignoring them right and left. I think on an individual level, I think, watching what's on your kids' phones, trying, I think teachers, I am a strong believer in the phone-free schools, with the exception of students who may need, a kind of prosthetic device for a disability. But I think that's a really important element. Teachers, parents, working together. But, that can sound kind of naive. I think it's important to recognize that these things are here and cohabiting with them. Something we're all going to have to learn to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that sort of summarizes your book in a way, like kind of like trying to cohabit with all this technology and like what happens when something goes wrong is sort of what this book is about at its heart. I want to spend a few minutes before we wrap about the fact that you are a teacher of medieval literature at University of Virginia.
Yes.
I had a few, because I'm a supreme literary nerd myself. I love turning back the clock a little bit. And it's such a nice escape from all this AI talk. Like, let's go back to just, writing on parchment, with a quill. I'm sure that's not how they do it. But let's talk for a moment about storytelling in the Middle Ages. Can you tell me, here's a question I'm interested in, like, what was the role of the storyteller back then in society versus what the role of the storyteller is now?
That's a great question. So storytelling in the Middle Ages, I guess as it does today, but in that world, they were very self-conscious about all these different elements that the storyteller had a kind of ennobling quality. There's a wonderful Old English word, the shope, which translates roughly as bard. And the idea of the world making capacity of narrative. Storytelling, the word that they used was making. So Chaucer was a maker. William Dunbar wrote a poem, Lament for the Mockers, the makers. And making, it's like we talk about, as novelists today, we talk about world building. In the Middle Ages, there was this really beautiful conception of making the world through story. And I've always been enchanted by frame narratives like the Canterbury Tales, where you have all these different genres within one big work. You have a fabliau, kind of an obscene story. You have romance. You have epic. You have a religious tale. You have a sermon in the Parson's Tale. All those different kinds of narratives wrapped within a larger one. And so I kind of cut my teeth as a writer on my first two novels were historical novels. historical thrillers set in the 14th century. And I was really thinking about medieval forms of narrative as I was writing those, stories within stories within stories.
Mm.
There's also an element of, in legal cases, like someone who gets up and speaks, tells the initial story that the case is based on, is called a narrator.
Okay.
That's where our idea of the narrator come from. It's somebody speaking at law about
Mm.
the story. And so law becomes a place where stories are told. So I like to think about that. I guess you could call it a kind of interdisciplinary way of understanding storytelling. It
Yeah.
comes from so many different ways of thinking and writing.
It's funny because as you were going through those different kind of attributes and techniques, I was noticing a lot of what's in culpability. I mean, there's a lot of kind of different voices, different kind of interstitials. There is a lawyer at the center of the book.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, all right, one more question about storytelling in the Middle Ages. If there was a thing that you thought that you really emulate about medieval storytelling, that you think writers today don't quite do XYZ thing as well, or writers could learn a lot about XYZ from medieval storytelling.
Ooh. Oh, they could learn to do better dream sequences.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's one, because there's a whole genre of a narrative in the Middle Ages called dream visions.
Uh-huh.
And they're so elaborate and wonderful and crazy. And I feel like I hate writing dream sequences. I usually hate reading them.
Yeah.
But I do think that the Middle Ages gives us a great set of tools for thinking about how dreams work.
But I mean, there's this whole saying, this stock saying in creative writing, like "tell a dream, lose a reader," right? I mean, you just admitted that you hate reading them. Like, I just.
Well, I'm not an MFA. That whole world
Okay.
is show don't tell. I don't even know what that means. Those phrases are, to me, just baffling.
Okay.
I never understood them. So yeah.
Okay, so more dream sequences. All right. One last question about the Middle Ages. I have a book that I brought up in the green room that I loved called The Swerve. I think Stephen Greenblatt is the author, and it's about it's an incredibly adventurous story in my opinion about a poem by Lucretius, who's a Roman poet, and that poem is lost, it seems, to time. And then there's this manuscript hunter who goes from monastery to monastery to try to find it, and then he finds like sort of what seems to be like the one and only copy ever, and then he resuscitates it, and then it enters circulation again, and it becomes extremely influential on kind of many thinkers since then. Now, I thought that was a rip-roaring tale, as rip-roaring as it gets for kind of somebody hunting down an ancient manuscript. But when I brought it up, you said you had, quote, strong feelings about it.
Yes.
Now I want to hear these strong feelings.
All right, here we go. So, all right. Well, I have deep respect for Stephen Greenblatt. He's somebody who revolutionized my field, the study of early English literature. And there's nobody in my field who's a more beautiful, elegant writer, and his work on Shakespeare is spectacular. So this particular book, for people in my field in medieval literature, it just it made our skulls explode. First of all, Poggio Bracciolini, the figure who was supposedly hunting for manuscripts of Lucretius, the only reason he found a manuscript of Lucretius is that for several centuries, monks had been copying that manuscript and circulating that work and circulating it among themselves. And he uses it to tell a story about the modern mind and how we discovered rationality and self-consciousness and so on. But anyone who's read St. Augustine, who was writing in the late 4th and early 5th century, anyone who's read Petrarch or Marjorie Kemp or Chaucer, all these medieval figures, medieval or even earlier figures, they knew what self-consciousness was, what self-doubt was. They thought of themselves as modern. It's a real myth among people who study the Renaissance that the human individual was discovered by Shakespeare, or discovered in the Renaissance.
Oh, right. That's Harold Bloom's thing, right? That Shakespeare invented the psychology.
Invented the human, invented the modern. It is just absolute crap. And it's one of the most persistent historiographical myths in the study of the Western tradition. And I don't know if people who study the last 2,000 years in China or India or wherever, I don't think they subscribe to that bizarre kind of narrative. Somehow it's this Western tradition that is still clinging to it. So I I'm not a book banner, but I'm a book arguer, and I would say that particular book gets under my skin more than any other I've ever read, maybe.
Oh my gosh. So, and it's not so much that it's factually wrong. Really, it's about sort of like not giving the right credit,
Yeah.
or like sort of like it's sort of like giving too much credit to one person when in fact such trends were always there, and so on.
Yeah, and like the idea that you're discovering a manuscript in these dust-covered monasteries where, thought goes to die. That conception. I'm not even caricaturing the book.
Yeah.
I think the book caricatures the medieval world.
Oh my God. I feel like such a Philistine now. I mean, I bought that story hook, line, and
It's
sinker.
just I'm one of the few people in this world that if you pick the wrong person if you want that book. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to.
I picked the right person. I think I picked the right person.
Again, I would say it's just that book. I love his work.
Yeah.
I think his biography of Shakespeare, Will in the World, is absolutely stunning. I think he's amazing. So, but we all write one bad book.
All right, let's take a couple audience questions here. I'll let my producer throw one up. This is an audience question. Tell us about Oprah. What was the moment like when you got the call? Describe also being on the show.
Yeah, so this was, well, one little bit of backstory is that my novel was actually supposed to come out in October, still a couple of months from now. But my publishers knew this was going on. And then when I got the call, I learned when Oprah called me, I was in a hotel room in DC getting ready for a banquet. And I was actually ironing my shirt. And I knew a call was coming from my publicist, or so I thought. So I turned the iron off, got ready, and she called and she said, is this Bruce? And it didn't sound like my publicist. And I said, yes. And she said, Oprah Winfrey here. And my heart just kind of stopped, because when you're an author, you kind of this is the thing that you would dream of most.
Yeah.
Is a call from Oprah Winfrey. And I thought to myself, I've just written a book about AI. This is an AI generated deepfake. This is a sick joke. And I said, oh, and she said, do you want to know why I'm calling? And I just closed my eyes and I shook my head and I said, you'll have to tell me. And she said, I'm calling about culpability. And just, my hands started shaking and everything went from there. So it was incredible. And being on her, she does these two different appearances for her authors. One is you fly out to Seattle and you record a podcast in the Starbucks headquarters, because there's a new partnership that she has with Starbucks. And there's like 150 people in there who have read the book, but they've all signed non-disclosure agreements. So they won't say who the pick is. This was in just the middle of May, just a couple months before the book is supposed to come out. And then, so we did that. And then I flew to New York to do her segment that comes out on CBS Mornings. Just such a kind, generous person, and a huge honor. Crazy.
I, like every other writer, has thought about, getting such a call and meeting Oprah and everything. But one thing I've always wondered about her is like, I wonder what's the energy like? Like, how would you describe? Because to me, it just seems like it's like a kind of supernova type energy. But just describe like sort of sitting down face to face and having Oprah like staring at you, asking you questions.
Well, I mean, she is so, the crazy thing is you think, okay, so she probably has all these handlers who read the books, and then she's just interviewing you. No, she knows these books cold, and she has strong opinions about them. If you watch the YouTube of our book club discussion, which was an hour long like this, we're arguing about the character of Lorelai, and about Noah and Lorelai's marriage, and she has strong opinions. Her book club members do. It's really wonderful, and you feel embraced by this. Someone who's really defined literary culture in our country for 30 years. Her books have created conversations, and it's just, I mean, obviously on one level, it feels ridiculous that a book of mine was chosen. I'm not just saying, it just seems impossible, but I think everyone says that who's been picked by her. So
Yeah.
Here we are. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're running out of time here. I want to wrap in a moment. I have one last question that I ask everybody here. And remarkably, you sort of answered the question already because so one of my big things as an author that I like to think about sort of about any book and including the books that I write is like trying to think about where I want the book to land emotionally. And it sounds like this is something that you think about consciously as well. I mean, I think some writers kind of treat it unconsciously or just kind of like kind of lurch toward it in the dark. But it sounds like you maybe similar to me or somebody who's kind of thinking about that right from the conception of the book almost. But the question that I always ask is this. If you could imagine the ideal reader for Culpability, somebody who's just getting it and taking it just the way that you hoped the best reader would, they finish the book, they close it, they put it in their lap, and just describe in a phrase or even a single word, how does that reader feel?
Disappointed because they want more.
There you go.
Yeah, they throw the book against the wall and they say, why can't I stay with these characters longer? Because that's when I finish a book and I want, and I get so when I've read a book that just really kills me and moves me.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I often am, where I'm like, why can't I have more of this world? You know, why can't I have you know, more of these characters? Why can't I live in this earth a little bit longer, you know?
Yep.
You know, the last book that did that to me, Janelle Brown, What Kind of Paradise? You know, it was just all I wanted was more, you know.
Yeah.
So it was deep admiration, but also disappointment.
Wonderful. All right. Well, folks, the book is called Culpability by Bruce Holsinger. Bruce, this has been fantastic.
Yep.
Oh, there it is. Beautiful.
There it is. Yeah.
There it is. Look at that wonderful cover. Please go out and buy it. It's not only a hot button issue that, you know, just will help you at every cocktail party you go to and every picnic and beach gathering you go to, but it is deeply probing, as he says, with a kind of moral thriller, a moral suspense story. It's like deeply probing some of these huge issues of our day. I think it's an important book as well as a really entertaining one. So Bruce, congratulations and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a huge pleasure.
All right, folks. We'll see you next time on Thoughtful Bro.